My name is Jessica Harper, and at 29, I thought I had finally learned to accept my place as the family disappointment. But this Christmas, as I watched my relatives tear through expensive wrapping paper while my spot at the table remained conspicuously gift-free, something inside me snapped. They had no idea that their struggling artist daughter had quietly built a multi-million-dollar empire. If you're settling in for this story, you're about to discover how I went from being the forgotten child to revealing a fortune that left my entire family speechless. Growing up as the youngest of three Harper children was like living in the shadow of two blazing suns. My older brother Marcus, now 34, was the academic prodigy who sailed through Yale Law School and landed a prestigious position at one of Manhattan's most elite firms. He married his college sweetheart, Victoria, and they now live in a sprawling estate in Westchester with their twin boys, complete with a tennis court and infinity pool. Every family gathering involved lengthy discussions about Marcus's latest courtroom victories and his firm's high-profile cases. Then there's my sister Caroline, 31, who seemed to emerge from the womb with perfect bone structure and an innate understanding of fashion. By 18, she was already walking runways for emerging designers. By 25, she had launched her own luxury clothing line that became a favorite among celebrities and socialites. Her Instagram account boasts over 2 million followers, and her designs have been featured in Vogue countless times. My parents' refrigerator is covered with magazine clippings of Caroline at fashion weeks around the world. And then there was me, Jessica, the artistic dreamer who never quite fit the Harper family mold. While Marcus excelled at debate team and Caroline dominated the social scene, I spent my afternoons in the art studio, covered in paint and lost in my own creative world. My parents, Richard and Patricia Harper, tolerated my artistic pursuits with the kind of bemused patience reserved for childhood phases they expected me to outgrow. Art is a lovely hobby, darling, my mother would say whenever I showed her my latest painting, but you need to think about practical career options. What about teaching? Artists can always teach. My father was more direct. The starving artist lifestyle isn't sustainable, Jessica. You need something stable, something real. Their attitude became a self-fulfilling prophecy in their minds. When I chose to attend the Rhode Island School of Design instead of following Marcus to an Ivy League university, they treated it like a personal failure. When I moved to a cramped studio apartment in Brooklyn after graduation, they saw it as confirmation that I was destined for mediocrity. The Harper family Christmas traditions were elaborate affairs that showcased wealth and success. Our Connecticut estate, a colonial mansion that had been in the family for generations, would be decorated by professional designers. The 12-foot Fraser fir in the living room was adorned with heirloom ornaments and designer baubles. Every surface gleamed with gold and silver accents, and the dining room table could seat 20 people comfortably. The gift exchange was always the centerpiece of our celebration, and it followed a predictable pattern. Marcus would receive expensive items befitting his status as a successful attorney, limited edition watches, first-class trips to exclusive resorts, or high-end technology. Caroline's gifts were always perfectly curated to her lifestyle: designer handbags, jewelry from renowned boutiques, or exotic skincare treatments from luxury spas around the world. My gifts, when I received them, were practical and modest. Art supplies from the local craft store, gift cards to chain restaurants, or generic items that felt like afterthoughts. One particularly memorable Christmas, Marcus received a vintage Rolex while Caroline got a week in the Maldives. I unwrapped a basic easel from a discount retailer and a paint set that was clearly purchased at the last minute. Every artist needs good tools, my mother said brightly, as if the $100 easel was equivalent to my siblings' five-figure gifts. The pattern became so predictable that I started to dread the holidays. I would sit on the outskirts of the family circle, watching my parents beam with pride as Marcus and Caroline displayed their latest acquisitions, while my own presence seemed to fade into the background. Extended family members would ask Marcus about his latest cases and Caroline about her fashion line, but conversations directed toward me usually involved well-meaning but condescending questions about whether I was still doing the art thing. The breaking point came during my third year out of college. I had been struggling to make ends meet with freelance illustration work and part-time jobs, living paycheck to paycheck in my tiny Brooklyn apartment. My parents' prediction about the starving artist lifestyle seemed to be coming true, and I felt like I was proving them right with every unpaid bill and every cup of ramen noodles I ate for dinner. That's when I discovered digital art and online marketplaces. What started as a desperate attempt to supplement my income became something much bigger. I began creating digital illustrations and selling them on various platforms. My style, which blended traditional artistic techniques with modern digital aesthetics, caught the attention of clients who were looking for something unique. The work started small. Logo designs for local businesses, illustrations for indie publications, custom artwork for individuals. But as my skills improved and my reputation grew, so did the scope of my projects. I was commissioned to create artwork for album covers, book illustrations, and eventually, major advertising campaigns. The turning point came when a startup company hired me to design their entire visual brand identity. The project was worth more than I had made in the previous 6 months combined, and the client was so pleased with the result that they recommended me to other companies in their network. Suddenly, I had more work than I could handle. But I kept this success hidden from my family. Years of being dismissed and underestimated had taught me to keep my victories private. When my parents asked about my work, I would give vague responses about some freelance projects or a few commissions. They assumed I was still barely scraping by, and I didn't correct their assumptions. As my client base expanded, I realized I needed to formalize my business. I incorporated Jessica Harper Studios and began hiring other artists to help with the growing demand. What had started as a one-woman operation became a thriving creative agency specializing in visual brand development for tech companies and startups. The irony wasn't lost on me that my family's dismissal of my artistic abilities had actually been a blessing in disguise. Without their interference or advice, I had been free to build something authentic and innovative. While they were focused on traditional markers of success, I was creating value in an emerging market they didn't understand or recognize. By my 5th year in business, Jessica Harper Studios was generating 7 figures annually. We had a team of 12 artists and designers, a beautiful studio space in Manhattan, and a client roster that included several Fortune 500 companies. I had quietly become more financially successful than either of my siblings, but my family remained oblivious. The secrecy wasn't just about protecting myself from their skepticism anymore. I had genuinely lost interest in seeking their approval. My work was fulfilling, my team was talented and passionate, and my clients valued what we created. I had built a life and career that aligned with my values and interests, something I wasn't sure either Marcus or Caroline could say about their own paths. Still, old habits die hard, and each Christmas I would return home hoping that maybe this year would be different. Maybe they would ask genuine questions about my work. Maybe they would show interest in my life beyond their preconceived notions about struggling artists. But year after year, the pattern remained the same. This December marked 6 years since I had started my business and 4 years since we had become genuinely profitable. As Christmas approached, I seriously considered breaking tradition and spending the holiday somewhere else. My assistant Emma had suggested I join her family celebration in Vermont, and the idea of a low-key, intimate gathering was incredibly appealing. "You don't owe them your presents," Emma said as we reviewed the year-end financial reports that showed record profits. "Especially if being there makes you feel terrible about yourself." I stared at the numbers on the screen. Revenue of $2.8 million for the year, with healthy profit margins and a growing team of talented individuals who genuinely enjoyed their work. We had just signed 3 major contracts for the following year, including a rebranding project for a tech unicorn that would be worth more than my brother made in 2 years. "Maybe it's time they knew the truth," I said finally. Emma raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure you're ready for that conversation?" I wasn't sure, but I was tired of hiding. Tired of letting them think I was the family failure when I had actually built something remarkable. Tired of sitting through Christmas dinners feeling like an outsider in my own family. "Book the flights," I told her. "But keep those Vermont plans as a backup." The journey home to Connecticut felt like traveling through time. As my Uber pulled up to the circular driveway of my childhood home, I was struck by how little had changed. The house still looked like something from a New England tourism brochure, all white columns and black shutters, with perfectly manicured gardens and not a leaf out of place. My mother answered the door wearing her signature holiday attire, a cashmere sweater in festive red and her grandmother's pearl necklace. Her smile was warm but brief, the kind reserved for obligatory family gatherings. "Jessica, sweetheart, you made it." She gave me a quick hug that smelled of expensive perfume and white wine. "I wasn't sure you'd come this year. You've been so distant lately." By distant, she meant I had stopped calling as frequently and had declined several family dinners over the past year. As my business had grown, I had less patience for conversations that inevitably made me feel inadequate. Inside, the house was bustling with its usual Christmas chaos. Marcus and Victoria were arranging an elaborate display of gifts under the massive tree while their 8-year-old twins, Blake and Chase, ran around with expensive electronic toys. Caroline was holding court on the sofa, showing our Aunt Michelle photos from her latest photo shoot in Milan. "Look who decided to grace us with her presence," my father said from his leather armchair, not bothering to get up. His tone was jovial, but there was an edge of disappointment that I had learned to recognize. "How's the art world treating you, kiddo?" The diminutive nickname stung, as it always did. At 29, I was hardly a kid, but my father seemed incapable of seeing me as anything other than his impractical youngest daughter. "It's been busy," I replied, settling into an empty chair near the fireplace. "Busy is good," my mother said automatically, though her attention was already drifting toward Caroline's animated storytelling about celebrity encounters at fashion events. I spent the evening on the periphery of conversations, listening to Marcus discuss his latest legal victory and Caroline describe her upcoming collaboration with a luxury jewelry brand. When I attempted to mention that my company had just been featured in a major design publication, the conversation quickly shifted to Victoria's new interior decorator. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom with its outdated floral wallpaper and twin bed, I stared at the ceiling and wondered why I continued to subject myself to this treatment. I had built a successful business, employed talented people, and created beautiful work that clients valued. Why did being in this house make me feel like a failure? My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "How's it going? Remember, you're amazing regardless of what anyone else thinks." It was exactly what I needed to hear. Christmas morning dawned gray and cold, with the promise of snow in the air. I could hear movement downstairs as the household staff prepared breakfast and my family began their elaborate holiday morning ritual. The smell of cinnamon rolls and bacon wafted up the stairs, mingling with the scent of pine from the massive tree. By the time I made it downstairs, everyone else was already gathered in the living room. Marcus and Victoria were helping the twins with a complex Lego set that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Caroline was taking Instagram photos of herself in silk pajamas that looked more like a fashion shoot than casual morning wear. "There's our sleeping beauty," my father said with forced cheer. "Ready for the Harper family Christmas extravaganza?" The gift exchange followed the same choreographed routine it had for the past decade. My father would stand by the tree like a master of ceremonies, selecting gifts one by one and making announcements about each recipient. It was performative and self-congratulatory, but it was our tradition. Marcus's family received first consideration, as always. The twins got the latest gaming systems and expensive sports equipment. Victoria received a designer handbag that probably cost more than most people's cars. Marcus himself was presented with a vintage wine collection and a week at an exclusive golf resort in Scotland. Caroline's gifts were equally extravagant: a diamond tennis bracelet, a first-class ticket to Fashion Week in Paris, and a limited-edition camera for her photography hobby. Each gift was presented with fanfare and photographed for the family's social media accounts. Other family members received thoughtful, expensive presents. My Aunt Michelle got a luxury spa weekend. My Uncle Robert received tickets to the Masters tournament. Even the household staff were given generous bonuses and gift cards. As the pile of unopened presents dwindled, I felt the familiar knot forming in my stomach. There were still several boxes under the tree, but none bore my name. I sat quietly, maintaining my composure as I had learned to do over the years, but inside, The hurt was as fresh as ever. Finally, my father reached for the last gift, a small box wrapped in gold paper. "And this," he said with a flourish, "is for our wonderful housekeeper, Maria, who keeps this family running smoothly." The room erupted in polite applause as Maria, clearly moved by the gesture, accepted the gift with tears in her eyes. It was a lovely moment, and I was genuinely happy for her. But the symbolism wasn't lost on me. The housekeeper had received a gift, and I hadn't. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room as everyone realized what had happened. My mother's face flushed red as she frantically looked around the tree area, as if my gift might materialize if she searched hard enough. "Oh my goodness," she stammered. "Jessica, I'm so sorry. Your gift must have been delayed in shipping. You know how unreliable delivery services are during the holidays." It was a transparent lie, and we all knew it. Caroline looked mortified. Marcus studied his coffee mug with sudden intensity. Victoria whispered something to the twins about playing in the other room. In previous years, I might have accepted the excuse gracefully, swallowed my hurt, and helped clear away the wrapping paper. I might have volunteered to help with dinner preparations, making myself useful to distract from the humiliation. But this year was different. This year, I had carried something with me for New York that would change everything. I stood up slowly, feeling every eye in the room on me. "Actually," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my body, "that's perfectly fine. Because I have something to share with all of you." I walked to my purse and retrieved a thick manila folder I had carefully prepared before leaving New York. Inside were documents I had never planned to show my family, but circumstances had changed my mind. "I thought this might be a good time to let you all know what I've been working on," I said, returning to the center of the room. I opened the folder and pulled out the first document, a glossy magazine featuring an article about emerging creative entrepreneurs. My photo was prominently displayed alongside the headline, "The Digital Revolution: How Young Artists Are Redefining Success." "This," I said, placing the magazine on the coffee table where everyone could see it, "is from Entrepreneur Magazine's latest issue. I'm featured as one of their 30 under 30 creative innovators." The room fell silent except for the soft crackling of the fireplace. Marcus reached for the magazine, his eyebrows rising as he read the article. "Jessica Harper Studios," he read aloud, "has revolutionized visual branding for the tech industry, with annual revenues exceeding $2.8 million. I pulled out the next document, our latest financial statement prepared by our accounting firm. That's correct. My company generated $2.8 million in revenue last year, with a profit margin of 35%. My mother's wine glass nearly slipped from her hand. Caroline's phone, which had been constantly in her hands all morning, lay forgotten on the sofa. "This year," I continued, laying out more documents, "we've already secured contracts worth over $4 million. We employ 12 full-time artists and designers, and we're expanding into a larger studio space in Midtown Manhattan." I placed the final document on the table, a property deed. "I also purchased a penthouse apartment in Soho last month. Paid in cash." The silence that followed was deafening. My father stared at the documents as if they were written in a foreign language. My mother's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "I don't understand," my father finally said. "You told us you were struggling. You said you were doing small freelance projects." "I told you I was working on art projects," I corrected gently. "You assumed they were small because you couldn't imagine that my work might have real value." Marcus was still flipping through the magazine article, his legal training evident in how carefully he was reading every detail. "This says you started the company 6 years ago. Why didn't you tell us?" "I tried," I said simply. "Do you remember 3 Christmases ago when I mentioned landing a big client?" Dad changed the subject to ask Marcus about his partnership track. "Last year, when I said I was hiring employees, Mom asked Caroline to show everyone her latest magazine cover instead." The truth hung in the air between us, undeniable and uncomfortable. Caroline was the first to find her voice. "Jessica, I had no idea. This is incredible. Why would you keep this secret?" "Because," I said, looking around at my family, My success didn't fit the narrative you had created about me. It was easier for you to see me as the struggling artist, the impractical dreamer, than to acknowledge that maybe you were wrong about my choices. My Aunt Michelle, who had been quietly observing from the corner, spoke up. Jessica, this is extraordinary. I had no idea you were running such a successful business. Few people did, I admitted. I learned early that it was safer to keep my achievements private than to risk having them dismissed or minimized. My father stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. When he turned back, his expression was a mixture of confusion and something that might have been pride. The numbers, he said, his business instincts taking over. These are legitimate? You've built a multi-million-dollar company. Completely legitimate, I confirmed. Audited by a top-tier accounting firm, fully compliant with all regulations, and growing at 20% year over year. Marcus closed the magazine and looked at me with what I could only describe as respect. Maddie, Jessica, I owe you an apology. We all do. You built this entirely on your own? Victoria asked, speaking for the first time since the revelation. I nodded. No family money, no connections, no safety net. Just talent, hard work, and the willingness to take risks that all of you were convinced would lead to failure. The morning that had started with familiar patterns of exclusion had become something entirely different. For the first time in my adult life, my family was seeing me clearly, not as the disappointing youngest child, but as a successful entrepreneur who had quietly surpassed all their expectations. But the recognition felt different than I had imagined it would. I had spent years craving their approval, their acknowledgement, their respect. Now that I had it, I realized it wasn't what I needed anymore. My mother was the first to approach me, tears in her eyes. Jessica, I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, I replied. But maybe next year, you could try asking about my work with genuine curiosity instead of making assumptions. The rest of Christmas Day unfolded in a surreal atmosphere. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know about my business, my clients, my plans for expansion. Relatives who had barely acknowledged my presence in previous years were eager to hear about the tech industry and the creative economy. Marcus, ever the lawyer, peppered me with questions about intellectual property and business structure. Caroline wanted to know if there were opportunities for collaboration between my company and the fashion industry. My parents began introducing me to other family members as our daughter Jessica, who runs a successful design company in New York. The attention was gratifying in some ways, but it also highlighted exactly what I had suspected. Their interest in me was directly proportional to my measurable success. It wasn't really me they were seeing, it was my financial achievements, my magazine features, my business metrics. Later that evening, as the extended family gathered for our traditional Christmas dinner, I found myself in the strange position of being the center of attention. Conversations that had excluded me for years now revolved around my insights and experiences. It was everything I had once desperately wanted, and yet it felt hollow. During a quiet moment, I stepped outside onto the back terrace, needing space to process the day's emotional whiplash. The snow had begun to fall, dusting the manicured gardens with a soft white blanket. Caroline joined me a few minutes later, wrapping her coat tightly against the cold. I need to tell you something, she said, her usual confidence replaced by uncertainty. I've been jealous of you for years. I turned to her in surprise. Jealous? Of me? She nodded, staring out at the falling snow. You had the courage to follow your passion. You built something meaningful from nothing. Do you know what I think about when I'm standing in front of cameras all day? I think about how I'm just a pretty face selling products I don't care about to people I'll never meet. Caroline, you're successful in your own right. Am I? She interrupted. Or am I just genetically lucky? You created value, Jessica. You built something that matters. I've just been riding on winning the genetic lottery. It was a surprisingly vulnerable admission from my sister, who had always seemed so confident in her chosen path. It's not too late to build something different, I told her. You have intelligence, creativity, and work ethic. Those matter more than genetics in the long run. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the snow fall. For the first time in years, I felt like I was having a real conversation with my sister rather than performing our assigned family roles. Marcus found us on the terrace a few minutes later, joining our impromptu sibling conference. "I owe you more than an apology," he said without preamble. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about us not listening when you tried to share your success. You're right. We dismissed your work because it didn't look like what we thought success should look like." "It's in the past," I said, though I appreciated his acknowledgement. "No, it's not," he insisted. "This affects how we move forward as a family. I want to do better. We all do." When we returned inside, I found my parents waiting in the living room. The rest of the family had moved to the dining room, giving us privacy for what felt like an overdue conversation. "Jessica," my father began, his usual commanding presence subdued, "I've spent the day thinking about the assumptions I made about your career, about your choices. I was wrong." My mother nodded, twisting her wedding ring nervously. "We thought we were protecting you from disappointment. We thought artistic careers were inherently unstable, and we wanted security for you. But you never asked what I wanted," I pointed out. "You never tried to understand my work or support my vision." "You're right," my father admitted. "I let my own biases about creative careers cloud my judgment. The truth is, you've built something more impressive than anything I achieved at your age." It was perhaps the first time I had ever heard my father acknowledge that someone else's accomplishments might surpass his own. "What matters now," my mother said, "is how we repair our relationship, how we move forward." I looked at my parents, these people who had shaped my childhood and influenced my self-perception in ways both positive and negative. They weren't villains, just flawed humans who had made mistakes based on their own fears and limitations. "I'd like that," I said finally. "But it has to be genuine. I won't pretend to be struggling anymore just to make you comfortable. And I won't hide my success to avoid challenging your assumptions." "We understand," my father said. "We want to know the real you, not the version we convinced ourselves existed." The days following Christmas brought an avalanche of attention from extended family and family friends. Word of my success spread quickly through our social circle, and my phone buzzed constantly with messages from relatives who suddenly wanted to reconnect. Some of the outreach felt genuine, cousins and family friends who were truly excited about my success and curious about my work. But much of it was transparently opportunistic. Distant relatives emerged from the woodwork with business ideas they wanted me to fund. Family friends mentioned talented children who were looking for internships or job opportunities. I handled these requests diplomatically but firmly, explaining that my company had established hiring processes and that I didn't mix family relationships with business decisions. For those who seemed genuinely interested in the creative industry, I offered to share resources and advice, but I maintained clear boundaries about direct involvement. The most meaningful changes happened within my immediate family. Marcus started sending me articles about intellectual property law and small business regulations, genuinely trying to understand the challenges I faced as an entrepreneur. Caroline began exploring the intersection of fashion and digital art, discovering interests she had never pursued while focused solely on modeling. My parents made efforts to educate themselves about the creative economy and the tech industry. My father subscribed to design magazines and started asking thoughtful questions about my clients and projects. My mother visited my studio in Manhattan, something she had never done in the 6 years since I'd started the company. "It's beautiful," she said, walking through our open, light-filled workspace where my team of artists and designers collaborated on projects. I had no idea it was so professional. The comment revealed how little she had understood about what I was building, but her genuine effort to learn felt like progress. Not everything changed overnight. There were still moments of tension, times when old patterns emerged. During a family dinner in February, my father caught himself about to ask me if I was still doing the art thing before stopping mid-sentence and asking instead about our latest client acquisition. These small corrections, these conscious efforts to see me differently, meant more than grand gestures would have. They represented genuine attempts to change ingrained behaviors and assumptions. Professionally, the new year brought exciting developments for Jessica Harper Studios. The tech unicorn rebranding project I had mentioned became a massive success, leading to additional contracts with other major companies. We moved into our expanded Manhattan studio space, tripling our square footage and adding a client presentation area that rivaled the showrooms of much larger agencies. More importantly, I had found my voice in advocating for creative professionals. I began speaking at industry conferences about the business side of artistic careers, helping other artists understand how to value their work and build sustainable businesses. The message resonated. Creativity and business acumen weren't mutually exclusive, and artists didn't have to choose between financial success and artistic integrity. I also established a mentorship program within my company, partnering with design schools to provide opportunities for emerging artists who might not have traditional support systems. Having experienced firsthand how dismissive attitudes could undermine creative confidence, I was committed to creating an environment where artistic vision was valued and nurtured. As the next Christmas approached, I received an invitation that was markedly different from previous years. Instead of a formal card with standard language about family gathering, my mother called personally. "We're planning Christmas dinner, and I wanted to make sure we're creating an environment where you feel valued and heard," she said. "What would make the holiday meaningful for you?" It was a small thing, perhaps, but it represented a fundamental shift in how my family approached our relationships. Instead of assuming my participation, they were asking for my input. Instead of planning around me, they were planning with me. "I'd like to bring Emma," I said. "She's become family to me, and I'd like you to meet her." "Of course," my mother replied without hesitation. "We'd love to meet someone who's important to you." This Christmas, as I prepared to return home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: anticipation rather than dread. Not because I expected perfection, but because I finally felt like my family was committed to seeing and accepting the real me. The woman who had once been overlooked and underestimated had built not just a successful business, but the self-respect to demand better treatment. The empire I had revealed wasn't just financial, it was the strength to stand in my truth and insist on relationships based on genuine understanding rather than convenient assumptions. As I packed for the trip to Connecticut, including a portfolio of our company's latest work to share with family members who were finally ready to listen, I reflected on how much had changed in a single year. The overlooked youngest child had become a woman who could neither be ignored nor diminished by others' limited expectations. I had learned that true success wasn't just about building wealth or achieving recognition. It was about creating the life and relationships that aligned with your values and honored your authentic self. The empire I had built was both external and internal, a thriving business and the unshakable foundation of self-worth that allowed me to engage with the world on my own terms. When my phone buzzed with a text from Caroline asking if I could help her explore opportunities in the creative industry, I smiled. Not because I needed her approval anymore, but because authentic connection was finally becoming possible. The journey from being the forgotten child to revealing my fortune had taught me that the most valuable thing you can build isn't a business or a bank account. It's the courage to be fully yourself, regardless of who's watching or whether they understand. And sometimes, that courage can transform not just your own life, but the lives of everyone around you. As we gathered around the table this Christmas, sharing stories and laughter, I thought about how many people might be feeling overlooked or undervalued in their own families. Have you ever felt invisible in a room full of people who are supposed to love you? How did you find the strength to stand in your truth and demand the recognition you deserved? I'd love to hear your experiences and stories of building your own empires, whether they're financial, creative, or simply the empire of self-respect that allows you to live authentically. Thank you for being part of this journey with me, and remember, your worth has never been determined by others' ability to see it. The months following that transformative Christmas brought changes I never could have anticipated. My story had somehow found its way beyond our family circle, whether through Caroline's social media presence or Marcus's professional network. I'm not entirely sure, but suddenly I was receiving messages from strangers who had heard about my journey from overlooked family member to successful entrepreneur. Your story gave me the courage to finally show my parents my photography portfolio, wrote a young woman from Oregon. They've been pushing me toward accounting for years, but after hearing about your experience, I realized I was letting their fears dictate my future. These messages started arriving daily, then hourly. People sharing their own stories of family dismissal, creative dreams deferred, and the struggle to find validation in unsupportive environments. What had begun as a personal revelation was apparently resonating with thousands of others who felt unseen in their own families. Emma suggested I consider speaking publicly about the experience. "You have a platform now," she said during one of our weekly strategy meetings. "People are clearly hungry for this message about following unconventional paths and building success on your own terms." The idea terrified me. I had built my career behind the scenes, creating visual content for other people's brands and messages. The thought of standing in front of audiences, sharing such personal experiences, felt completely outside my comfort zone. But the messages kept coming, and many included specific requests for advice about starting creative businesses, dealing with unsupportive families, or finding the courage to pursue unconventional careers. I realized I had knowledge and experience that could genuinely help people who were struggling with similar challenges. My first speaking engagement was at a small creative conference in Philadelphia. I had prepared extensively, but nothing could have readied me for the response. The room was packed, with people sitting in the aisles and standing along the walls. During the Q&A session, several audience members shared their own stories of family dismissal and creative struggle, some with tears in their eyes. "I dropped out of medical school to pursue music, and my family hasn't spoken to me in 2 years," said a young man in the front row. "How do you deal with the isolation of choosing your authentic path when everyone you love thinks you're making a mistake?" The question hit close to home. I thought about those early years when I had felt so alone in my choices, when every family gathering reinforced my sense of being the outsider. "The isolation is real," I told him. "But it's temporary if you're building something meaningful. The people who truly belong in your life will eventually see your success and respect your choices. And you'll find new people, mentors, colleagues, friends, who understand and support your vision from the beginning." After the event, I was approached by a literary agent who had been in the audience. "Have you considered writing a book about this experience?" she asked. "There's clearly an audience for stories about unconventional success and family dynamics." The idea had never occurred to me, but over the following weeks, I found myself outlining what that book might look like. Not just my own story, but a broader exploration of how families can unconsciously limit their members' potential and how individuals can break free from those limitations while still maintaining meaningful relationships. Meanwhile, Jessica Harper Studios continued to grow beyond my wildest projections. The visibility from my speaking engagements had brought new clients who were specifically interested in working with our company because of our story. Tech startups founded by unconventional entrepreneurs, creative agencies looking to rebrand themselves as more innovative, established companies wanting to appeal to younger, more diverse audiences. We hired our first full-time business development manager and expanded into a second studio space in Los Angeles. The financial success was gratifying, but what excited me most was the culture we were creating, a place where creativity was valued equally with business acumen, where diverse perspectives were sought out rather than merely tolerated. "You've built something special here," said David Chen, a veteran art director who joined our team after leaving a prestigious traditional agency. "I've worked at some of the biggest names in the industry, but I've never experienced this kind of collaborative environment where everyone's voice genuinely matters." The success also brought unexpected challenges. I started receiving calls from investors wanting to buy equity in the company, offering valuations that would have made me wealthy beyond anything I had ever imagined. The attention was flattering, but it also forced me to clarify what I actually wanted from this business I had built. "You could sell a minority stake and still maintain control," Emma pointed out during one of our discussions about the various offers. "The capital injection could fund expansion faster than we ever thought possible." I spent sleepless nights weighing the options. The financial security would be incredible, and the resources could help us take on even bigger projects. But I had seen too many creative companies lose their soul after bringing in outside investors who didn't understand the artistic vision. "I want to stay independent," I finally decided. "We're growing at a sustainable pace, we're profitable, and we have control over our creative direction. That's worth more than any amount of investment money." The decision felt right, But it also highlighted how different my definition of success had become from my family's traditional metrics. They had always measured achievement through external validation, prestigious jobs, expensive possessions, social status. I was learning to value autonomy, creative fulfillment, and the ability to make decisions aligned with my values. This philosophical difference became apparent during a family dinner in spring when my father mentioned the investment offers he had heard about through his business network. "You should seriously consider taking some of that money," he advised. "It's an opportunity to really scale the business, maybe go national or even international." "The business is already scaling naturally," I replied. "We're opening the LA office next month, and we have clients in 6 countries. Growth doesn't always require outside investment." He looked puzzled. "But think about the exit strategy. If you bring in the right investors now, you could be looking at a massive payout when you sell." "What if I don't want to sell?" I asked. "What if I want to build something sustainable that lasts, rather than something designed for a quick exit?" The conversation revealed how differently we approached business and success. My father saw companies as vehicles for generating maximum return on investment. I saw my company as a creative platform and a community of artists building meaningful work together. These differences didn't create conflict anymore, but they did underscore how much my perspective had shifted since revealing my success. I no longer needed my family's approval for my choices, which paradoxically made our relationships more honest and relaxed. Caroline had been exploring her own creative ventures, launching a blog about sustainable fashion that was gaining significant readership. "I never realized how much I missed creative writing," she told me during one of our now regular sister lunches. "All those years focused on modeling, I forgot I had other interests and talents." Her blog had caught the attention of several environmental organizations, and she was in talks about a potential book deal focused on ethical fashion choices. Watching her discover new aspects of herself was deeply satisfying, not because I had influenced her path, but because she was finally exploring her authentic interests rather than just leveraging her physical attributes. Marcus had made changes too, though his were more subtle. He had taken on more pro bono cases focused on arts advocacy and intellectual property rights for small businesses. "Your experience made me realize how much legal support creative entrepreneurs need," he explained. "I want to use my skills to help people like you navigate the business side of their work." He had also stepped back from some of the more prestigious but soul-crushing corporate work that had been consuming his life. "I'm making less money," he admitted, "but I'm actually enjoying practicing law again." My parents' evolution was perhaps the most surprising. My mother had become genuinely interested in the creative economy, attending gallery openings and design exhibitions with newfound appreciation for the business acumen required to succeed as an artist. My father had started reading about alternative business models and companies that prioritized purpose alongside profit. "I've been thinking about our own company's legacy," he said during a visit to my Manhattan studio. "We've always focused on maximizing shareholder value, but what if we considered other metrics of success? Employee satisfaction, community impact, long-term sustainability." It was a remarkable shift for a man who had built his career on traditional corporate principles. I didn't think my story alone had changed his worldview, but it had apparently opened him to perspectives he hadn't previously considered. The book project took on a life of its own throughout the summer. What had started as a personal memoir evolved into something broader, part business guide, part family psychology, part manifesto for unconventional success. I interviewed dozens of other entrepreneurs who had built successful businesses despite family skepticism or outright opposition. Their stories were remarkably similar to mine in many ways, but also beautifully diverse. A first-generation immigrant who built a tech company despite his parents' insistence on traditional professional careers. A woman who left corporate law to start a sustainable farming operation. A young man who turned his gaming hobby into a multi-million-dollar esports organization. The common threads were resilience, the willingness to define success on their own terms, and the eventual recognition that seeking approval from people who don't understand your vision is futile. But many also described the eventual transformation of their family relationships once their success became undeniable. "The hardest part wasn't building the business," said Maria Santos, whose organic skincare company now sold in over 500 stores nationwide. It was maintaining my self-confidence when the people closest to me constantly questioned my choices. But once they saw the results, they became my biggest supporters. Writing these stories helped me understand that my experience wasn't unique or personal. It was part of a larger cultural shift toward entrepreneurship and creative careers that many families were struggling to understand and accept. The book, tentatively titled The Overlooked Empire: Building Success on Your Own Terms, was scheduled for publication the following year. My agent was optimistic about its potential impact, and I had already received inquiries about speaking engagements and media appearances. The prospect was both exciting and daunting. I had never sought the spotlight, preferring to work behind the scenes creating visual content for other people's messages. But I was learning that sometimes sharing your story becomes a responsibility, especially when it can help others who are facing similar challenges. As autumn approached and we began planning for another family Christmas, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in less than 2 years. The woman who had once felt invisible in her own family was now building a platform to help others find their voices and claim their worth. Jessica Harper Studios had grown to employ 22 people across 2 cities, with revenue projected to exceed $5 million for the year. We had won several industry awards and been featured in major design publications. But perhaps more importantly, we had created something that mattered: beautiful work that helped our clients communicate their visions, and a workplace culture that valued both creativity and business excellence. My family relationships had transformed from sources of pain into genuine connections based on mutual respect and understanding. We still had our differences, and there were still moments of tension when old patterns emerged. But there was also honesty, curiosity, and support that hadn't existed before. The speaking engagements and book project had connected me with thousands of people who resonated with the message about following unconventional paths and building success despite family skepticism. These connections had become a community of entrepreneurs, artists, and independent thinkers who supported each other's ventures and celebrated diverse definitions of achievement. Perhaps most significantly, I had developed an unshakable sense of self-worth that wasn't dependent on external validation. The approval I had once desperately sought from my family was nice to have, but it was no longer necessary for my sense of identity or success. When Emma asked me recently what I considered my greatest achievement, I had to think carefully about the answer. Building the financial success was important, I told her, and I'm proud of the company we've created. But I think my greatest achievement was learning to see my own value, regardless of whether anyone else recognized it. Everything else flowed from that internal shift. She nodded thoughtfully. That's probably why your story resonates with so many people. It's not really about business success or family drama. It's about the universal experience of learning to believe in yourself when the world tells you you're not enough. As I prepared for the upcoming holiday season, I felt something I had never experienced before during Christmas preparations: genuine excitement about spending time with my family. Not because I expected perfection, but because I knew I could handle whatever dynamics emerged while staying true to myself. The overlooked middle child had become a woman who could neither be overlooked nor defined by others' limitations. The empire I had built wasn't just financial or professional. It was the sovereignty I had claimed over my own life and the courage to live it authentically, regardless of who was watching or whether they understood. And perhaps most importantly, I had learned that the most powerful thing you can do for others is to stand fully in your truth. Not to prove them wrong or to seek their validation, but to give them permission to do the same. The ripple effects of that courage can transform not just your own life, but the lives of everyone around you who has been waiting for permission to be authentic.